The wind that sweeps across Puget Sound in late March carries a chill, not just the temperature but of an unspoken history. It whistles through the ancient firs of Tacoma, a city cradled by water and deep, dark forests, a place where, for one family, time itself shattered and froze on a Wednesday afternoon in 1986. Sometimes, the truest monsters don't emerge from the shadows. They walk among us, in the bright, harsh light of an ordinary day, cloaked in the unremarkable veneer of a neighbor, a colleague, a friendly face. And the quiet tragedy of a cold case isn't just the crime itself, it's the decades of what if, the corrosive uncertainty that hollows out a family and leaves the community glancing nervously over its shoulder, forever wondering who they missed, who was still out there, hiding in plain sight. This is the story of Michella Welch, a vibrant, trusting little girl, and a crime that ripped the innocence from Tacoma, Washington. It's a story of a case that went cold, deep cold, for over 3 decades, burying the truth beneath a mountain of indifference, faulty assumptions, and agonizing silence. But it is also the story of enduring love and the quiet, relentless justice that, finally, impossibly, came calling, 32 years later. The shadow of March 26, 1986, stretched long, a seemingly eternal night. But DNA technology, that cold, silent architect of truth, was waiting, patiently, to finally usher in the dawn. Michella Welch. Say her name and what you're imagining is an explosion of light and possibility. 11 years old, she was a middle child, nestled between an older sister, Lisa, and a younger brother, Justin, creating a perfect, chaotic, loving nucleus at the heart of the Welch family home. Her mother, Barbara, and her father, David, worked hard, carving out a good, solid life for their kids and a modest neighborhood in Tacoma. Michella was, by all accounts, a typical adventurous American girl of the mid-'80s. She had that infectious, gap-toothed grin, framed by thick, honey-brown hair, often pulled back in a practical ponytail, ready for action. She loved the outdoors, the way only an energetic preteen in the Pacific Northwest can. She'd spend hours exploring the creeks and wooded areas that still laced their suburban landscape, her curiosity leading the way like a compass needle. Her passions were simple and pure. She was an avid reader, devouring books that transported her far beyond the familiar streets of Tacoma. She loved music, particularly the catchy pop tunes of that decade, often singing along at the top of her lungs, oblivious to anyone who might hear her. But more than her activities, it was her character that people remembered. Michella was known for deeply empathetic and nurturing spirit. She was the one who looked out for the younger kids on the block, the one who tried to mediate squabbles between her siblings, the one who, despite her youth, seemed to understand the importance of kindness. She was described as responsible, dependable, possessing a maturity that occasionally belied her age. She was precisely the kind of kid you felt safe letting wander the neighborhood on the sunny afternoon. That deep sense of safety, that assumption of communal watchfulness, was one of the first casualties of the tragedy to come. The community itself, the quiet residential pockets near Puget Sound, was typical of 1980s America. Doors were often left unlocked. Neighbors kept an eye on one another's kids. Trust was the default setting. It was a time before cell phones, before the constant low level of anxiety that would later define parenting. Children were given a long leash, told to be home by the streetlights, encouraged to go out and play. And Michella was an expert at play. Her natural playground was the open space near the family's home, particularly the expanse of Puget Gulch, a popular but still wild wooded area a short distance from the main manicured park grounds. The Welch family's world, built on love, routine, and a hopeful vision for their children's futures, was, on that specific morning, perfectly whole, perfectly ordinary. Barbara and David were looking forward to their children's growth, to graduations, to weddings, to all the milestones that define a life well lived. Michella was just beginning to shed the last vestiges of childhood, standing on the threshold of her teenage years, with all their accompanying complexities and triumphs. Her life was a clean, unwritten slate, full of promise, a bright, beautiful canvas waiting for the strokes of a future that she would never get to paint. And the memory of that simple, beautiful normalcy, that is what would haunt her family most. March 26th, 1986. The calendar marked it as a Wednesday. In Tacoma, the weather was cooperating, delivering a surprisingly warm spring-like day, a welcome reprieve from the persistent gray of a Pacific Northwest winter. The sun was out, bright and deceptive, the kind of day that pulls children magnetically outdoors. For Michella Welch, the day began like any other, but with that added burst of energy and excitement only good weather can bring. She wasn't in school, it was an early dismissal day, granting her and her friends an unexpected afternoon of freedom. This freedom translated, as it often did, into the simple, uncomplicated joy of neighborhood play. Her afternoon began with the familiar, innocent errand. Michella and her older sister, Lisa, decided to walk to the nearby Wapato Park to pick up a treat, a birthday cake that their sister had ordered for a small family celebration later that evening. The park itself was a centerpiece of the neighborhood, a large, sprawling green space with a serene lake, walking trails, and dense sections of woods. It was a communal hub, always busy with joggers, dog walkers, and families enjoying the fresh air. It was a place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. They accomplished their mission. They picked up the cake, secured it, and were walking back home. But the pull of the beautiful day, the irresistible allure of the park's play structures and open spaces was too strong. They decided impulsively to stop and hang out for a while. Michella and Lisa were together, safe within the familiar boundaries of their neighborhood stomping grounds. But then a small, subtle shift in the day's pattern occurred, a pivot point so minor it seemed inconsequential at the time, but which, in retrospect, would become an object of endless, agonizing focus. The two sisters had a minor disagreement, an entirely typical sibling moment about what to do next. Lisa chose to walk ahead, taking the precious birthday cake home. Michella, drawn by the last vestiges of the warm sun and the promise of a little more fun, decided to stay behind, just for a few more minutes, around the area of the park's famous green bridge. She was seen by several people, a little girl, 11 years old, dressed in a red windbreaker-style jacket and dark pants. She was alone now, playing near the bridge, perhaps contemplating how to fill the next hour before she had to be home. The time was approximately 4 p.m. A few minutes stretched into an hour. The sun, once so warm, began its slow, inevitable slide toward the horizon, and the air started to turn cool. Back at home, as the late afternoon bled into early evening, a low-grade anxiety began to set in. Lisa was home with a cake, but Michella was not. Their parents weren't immediately alarmed. Kids could lose track of time, especially on a beautiful day. But as the clock ticked past 6:30 p.m. and then 7 p.m., the quiet hum of concern escalated into a jarring, heart-stopping terror. Michella was generally responsible. She knew her curfew. This was not like her. A desperate, frantic search began. The Welches, along with neighbors and friends, fanned out across the familiar streets, calling her name into the growing darkness. They went straight to Wapato Park, the last confirmed location, their voices raw with panic, searching under every slide, behind every tree, their flashlights slicing through the gathering dusk. The simple domestic scene of a birthday party had been replaced by a chaotic, terrifying tableau. The beautiful spring day had given way to a night that felt suddenly, menacingly cold. Every minute that passed, every empty swing set and silent trail deepened the chilling realization that this was no simple tardiness. Something terrible, something unthinkable had happened to their daughter somewhere between the Green Bridge and the safety of home. The innocence of March 26, 1986, was violently extinguished, leaving behind only the cold echo of a missing child's name ringing in the dark. The night was long, a blur of sickening hope and dread for the Welch family and the initial search teams. The Tacoma Police Department was now fully involved, though the first hours were hampered by the standard protocol delays that often plague missing persons cases. The agonizing time spent confirming that a child is truly missing, not just at a friend's house or temporarily lost. But the gut feeling in the pit of everyone's stomach, the escalating panic, told a different story. The formal search effort intensified at dawn on Thursday, March 27th. The focus remained squarely on Wapato Park, the last place Michella was known to have been. Teams of police officers, volunteers, and search and rescue personnel meticulously combed the park's 90. The initial investigation into Michella Welch's murder was launched with a massive, focused effort. In the days following the discovery, the Tacoma Police Department mobilized every available resource. Detectives worked around the clock, fueled by the gravity of the crime and the raw, collective desire to catch the killer before he could harm another child. The early police work focused on the immediate vicinity of Wapato Park and Puget Gulch. Teams conducted door-to-door canvasses, interviewing hundreds of residents. They were seeking anyone who might have seen Michella after her sister left, or, more importantly, anyone who might have seen a suspicious person, a man loitering, a strange vehicle, anything that deviated from the normal, everyday traffic of a suburban neighborhood. The primary challenge immediately became apparent: the lack of clear eyewitness testimony. Michella was alone for only a short period near the Green Bridge. While people had seen her, no one reported seeing a struggle, an abduction, or a distinct, menacing figure engaging with her. It was as if the killer had materialized and vanished, his actions cloaked by the subtle, natural isolation of the park's wooded edges and the sheer volume of daily activity. Detectives developed a profile of the presumed suspect, a man familiar with the park and the surrounding area, someone who could blend in seamlessly, perhaps a jogger, a park worker, or simply a neighbor taking a stroll. The initial theories were broad, encompassing transient individuals and known local sex offenders. The scope was wide, and the leads were heartbreakingly thin. The evidence collection, though thorough, was hampered by the technology of the era. Fingerprints, fiber analysis, and trace evidence were all meticulously processed. The seminal moment, the cornerstone of the case's future, was the collection and preservation of the biological evidence, specifically semen recovered from the crime scene. In 1986, this evidence could only confirm blood types and certain generic protein markers, allowing investigators to rule people out, but rarely to definitively identify an unknown suspect. The samples were stored in an evidence locker, a small, sealed bag containing the ultimate key to the mystery, awaiting the advent of a technology that did not yet exist. Suspects were interviewed, investigated, and often painfully dismissed. A major focus fell on an individual who had been questioned in relation to other nearby, non-fatal assaults. Leads were followed across state lines. Every piece of hearsay, every anonymous tip was logged and pursued, often leading to frustrating dead ends. The pressure from the community and the media was intense. The murder of a child in such a public manner became a national story, and the Tacoma police were under a relentless spotlight. But the case stalled. Weeks turned into months. The initial flurry of activity slowed to a grinding halt. Without a smoking gun, a clear witness, or a definitive forensic link, the case began to cool. The preserved biological evidence, while holding the potential for identification, was forensically inert in the face of 1986 technology. Investigators could generate a profile of the killer's secretor status and blood type, but that profile matched thousands of men in the Puget Sound area. A sense of pervasive failure began to settle over the investigation. The original team, dedicated and emotionally invested, felt the weight of the community's disappointment and the family's endless pain. The case files, massive tomes of interviews, reports, and evidence logs, were eventually relegated to the cold case shelves, sealed but not forgotten. The emotional toll on the Welch family during this time was incalculable. They attended press conferences, pleaded with the public for information, and endured the constant, painful intrusion of the media into their private grief. Every face on the street became a potential suspect. Every knock on the door, a sudden, desperate surge of hope, quickly crushed. The failure to make an arrest meant the wound was never allowed to heal. It remained open, raw, infected with the toxin of a silent, unpunished killer, living, breathing, somewhere nearby. The passage of time was not a healer, but a thief, stealing fresh memories and dulling the public's immediate outrage, threatening to bury Michelle's case forever. The investigation, once a roaring fire, had dwindled to a cold, faint ember, kept barely alive by the enduring commitment of a handful of detectives who simply refused to let go. The 1990s descended on the Michelle Welch case like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The initial surge of police activity and media coverage had faded, replaced by the grim, enduring reality of the cold case. The files sat in the vault, moved from the active case room to the archive, a physical representation of the decades of silence and pain that followed. For the Welch family, the passing years were an exercise in constant, corrosive emotional endurance. Grief did not retreat, it simply changed its shape. The milestones of a life Michelle never got to live, her junior high graduation, her sweet 16, her high school prom, her 21st birthday, each one was a fresh, agonizing reminder of the future stolen from her and from them. The empty chair at the dinner table was a permanent fixture. Her bedroom, once a space of lively chaos, became a quiet shrine, a museum of a life brutally truncated at 11 years old. Her parents, David and Barbara, and her siblings, Lisa and Justin, carried the weight of the unsolved murder every single day. The inability to name the killer, to assign a face and a penalty to the act, prevented any true closure. How do you find peace when the person who destroyed your family is potentially walking past you in the grocery store? The uncertainty was a venom that seeped into every aspect of their lives, coloring every memory, every smile, every quiet moment. The case was not entirely dormant. Throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, it was periodically reviewed. New detectives would inherit the massive file, drawn in by the tragedy and the tantalizing, though then unusable biological evidence. The reviews were hopeful rituals, dusting off old reports, re-interviewing original witnesses, chasing down minor details that were missed in the initial chaos. But they invariably ended the same way, in frustration, with the realization that the original investigation had hit a technical wall. However, a revolution was quietly taking place in the scientific world. In the mid to late 1990s, DNA technology, specifically short tandem repeat analysis, became the gold standard for forensic identification. This technology allowed for the creation of unique genetic profiles from minuscule amounts of biological material, precisely the kind of material that had been carefully stored in the Tacoma police evidence locker since 1986. In the late 1990s, the Michelle Welch evidence was submitted for DNA testing. The test successfully generated a full, viable male DNA profile. This was a major, if quiet, breakthrough. It meant the killer had a genetic fingerprint. The problem, of course, was that this fingerprint belonged to a man with no criminal record in the system. He was an unknown male profile. The profile was entered into the national database, CODIS, a digital net cast wide across the country, waiting for a match. And for years, it waited. The computer spiriter / no match. The early 2000s saw the case revisited again. Detectives used the newly acquired DNA profile to rule out original suspects, provided definitive proof of their innocence, a small, quiet measure of justice, but a dead end nonetheless. A renewed media push was made, featuring the family's enduring pain and the new revelation of the DNA profile, hoping for a spontaneous confession or a tip from someone who recognized the abstract concept of a killer's genetic code. Nothing came. The case became a symbol of Tacoma's lost innocence, a painful civic memory. It was one of the city's most enduring and high-profile unsolved murders. Time, the thief, continued its work. Witnesses aged, memories faded, and the possibility of a solution seemed to drift further away with every passing year, becoming a silent, bitter fact of life for the Welch family. Yet, a small flame of hope was deliberately kept alive. Every few years, detectives would check the CODIS database. Every major advancement in forensic science was noted, and the evidence was meticulously tracked. The cold case room, though silent, held the physical proof of the crime, a sealed box waiting for the future to catch up to the past. The Welch family, through their enduring love for a daughter who remained forever 11, provided the emotional fuel for the investigators who refused to let Michelle's name be forgotten. The decades of silence were a testament to the killer's luck and anonymity, but also to the scientific limitations of the time. That, however, was about to change. A new, powerful technology was emerging from the private sector, one that would look far beyond the criminal database, promising to shatter the killer's anonymous shield forever.